It's July 29th, I think, Wednesday. Down at the farm, hopefully going to do some mowing around field edges and a little bit of the waterway stuff that didn't get bailed off by our neighbor that hayed the good stuff. But there's a lot to do. So I'm not going to get in a real big hurry. Going to probably grease up the mower and stuff. And maybe find a couple other things to work on for a little bit and try to get a little bit of that dew burned off, because grass isn't going to cut very well if it's all soft. Got plenty of things that I can probably work on, a few random projects. Still need to put the combine back together from the stuff that I tore apart 6 months ago, which that could be interesting at this point. Hopefully I don't have too many extra bolts or too many missing bolts. So got the hood open and the side panels off. Used the air compressor with a blowgun to blow out the radiator, and then the oil cooler and the condenser for the air conditioner. Especially when you're doing stuff like mowing, you end up with a lot of grass seeds and random pieces of plant tissue up in the air, which then gets sucked in and stuck in the radiator, and it doesn't cool as well. So it's kind of important to blow those out periodically to make sure you don't overheat anything. And then just was checking fluids. This tractor has a little bit of a leak on the seal on the front end of the transmission. Not enough to really matter, but enough that we need to sort of check the hydraulic level every once in a while. So that's on the dipstick at the back. It is good. I don't know how well it's going to show up on the camera there, but it's between normal and max. However, I checked the engine oil, and it looks like we've got kind of some slop there, but the actual level is a little bit below the range, which, based on the markings on the dipstick, makes it look like it's 2 quarts low, which I've not known this tractor to use oil ever in the past, so that's a little perplexing. And I don't see anything that's wet enough that it could have lost 2 quarts of oil during operation. I need to check how many hours it's been since the oil has been changed, but I'm sure that it was changed either last fall or this spring. So it has some hours on it, but not enough that the oil should be degraded by any means. We've got some spots, so this has like a panel that comes off the side of the motor, and there's a little bit of seepage there that you can see where the dust has stuck to the oil that's seeped out, but I definitely don't see anything where it could have lost 2 quarts, which means it maybe is burning some, but it doesn't have a lot of hours on it, and as far as we know, the engine is in good shape. What do we got? 3791. So his oil was changed 410. So it's just had 1 season on it. So it should be maybe 100 hours or so, I would guess, that the tractor's had on it since then. Let's see. I've got to remember how to get the hours on it. It should show the hours in that display. There we go. It did at that time. 3909. So it's had a little over 100 hours, 130 or so. Which, I mean, is a few hours, but not enough that the oil should be in bad shape and be burning off at an abnormal rate. So I have to ask Dad about that and see if he ever remembers having to add oil. I don't check oil every day on things that normally don't use anything, but I know that I've checked it a few times during the season anyway. So, hope nothing bad is about to happen. One factor, which I don't think is all of it, but could be part of it, there's a little bit of a slope right here, and we're sloped away from the dipstick. So the oil level is going to be lower in the pan on this side of the engine where the dipstick is than the other side. And if I remember right, I believe when I changed the oil on this, I had the tractor face the other way, which would have been the opposite case. So that may explain a little bit of the discrepancy, although it still shouldn't be that much low. So bottom line, I guess, in all cases, we're going to put a couple quarts of oil into this, and then probably keep a pretty close eye on it here for the rest of the summer and during harvest if it ends up running some augers and stuff. And hopefully make sure we don't burn any more oil, at least. It is kind of important to note that I don't remember the exact number of quarts this uses, but it's around 5 gallons. So 2 quarts out of 5 gallons is not really a huge percentage. It's not like we're off the bottom of the dipstick and the engine stopped turning or anything like that. But we don't want that to happen. So we need to make sure there's oil in there. Rock and roll. Well, we're getting a little bit of excitement here. I don't know if you can see it, but the slip clutch on the PTO shaft is actually smoking. I suspect that's because the bolts and the springs are probably not as tight as they need to be. At least now that it's slipped some and gotten the metal parts polished off a little bit. It seemed like it was fine on the first couple passes along the corn up here. And then once I got down into the thicker stuff, it kind of balled up and slipped some, and then it's been kind of acting funny for the rest of this pass. So I think I'm going to run home and snug those bolts up a little bit and try again. Hopefully nothing terrible has happened, but we do seem to be slipping a little bit more than we should be on that slip clutch. Alright, so what we've got here is essentially 3 plates, I think, that are attached to the shaft, and then 2 plates that are attached to the hub that goes to the gearbox, and then there's clutch material in between the two. So basically you've got these bolts with the springs, and you set these springs to a certain height, and that dictates how much torque there is before things start slipping. So the basic idea here is that you want the slip clutch to slip instead of tearing up stuff in the PTO driveline or with the mower or with the tractor, which is especially beneficial on a 540 PTO like this, because essentially power is a combination of torque and speed. So with a 540 shaft transmitting the same power as a 1000 RPM shaft, that 540 would see close to twice as much torque stress. And that's why big tractors don't have 540 PTOs in a lot of cases, because you twist things apart. So I'm going to go find the book and see what the height's supposed to be on those springs, and then tighten up the bolts, and hopefully that'll solve our issue. Part of the issue, or part of the reason that this is causing problems, I think, is that you're really supposed to loosen those up and slip the thing when you start using it at the end of the season, because they'll kind of rust together over the winter. And I don't know that we did that this year. And I think they maybe didn't really get polished up very good last year either, because we were fighting bearing issues and didn't mow as much as we normally might. But I guess I haven't actually checked yet. Is that thing cool enough that I can actually grab it? It's a little warm yet. But I think, so we replaced the bearings in the gearbox on that shaft, and that seems to be holding together okay so far. I really should pull the plug out and make sure we've got oil, but I haven't seen it throwing a lot onto the front of the deck here, so I think we're probably okay. We're a little warm, but not hot, so I think that probably is fine. Alright, it looks the same, but hopefully won't slip anymore because the bolts are tighter. I'm going to take a couple wrenches and a caliper with me to the field in case we need to adjust it a little bit more. Now we're showing a boat full, so maybe there was more contribution to that from being on the slope than what I thought. Maybe it wasn't actually that low. Well, it's got enough oil now at least, so I guess that's good. Been running for maybe not quite an hour. Things seem to be going smoothly though. Haven't slipped the clutch, or have slipped it a little bit, but it's not slipping all the time at least. And also came to a little different spot to mow. I feared that part of the reason that I was having trouble was because there was so much biomass down in the bottom of that ditch, and since it was tall and it's rained a little bit lately, that it was also pretty wet, and wet usually means tough. So I moved over to these waterways. These are just kind of some narrower ones that the neighbors that paid the rest of them thought were too narrow to get in with the baler and tractor and whatnot. So just going along and mowing stuff down. this is one of the ways that we deal with surface water. When you get a big rain, that's a lot of gallons, and it's basically all wants to go to the lowest point in the field. So, like, sorry, I need to back up to catch this last pass here, so I need to think about what I'm doing a little bit instead of talk. But as I was saying, when it rains a bunch over a number of acres, I mean, first we want as much as possible to go into the soil, and that's a lot of why we do no-till and cover crops to help with the soil infiltration, because we really want as much water as possible available to a crop. And then we have drain tile that go through all these fields, you know, some more than others, but at least the wet spots everywhere have drain tile to take the surplus moisture away underground. And that'll be a process of days usually. But what causes problems is that initial runoff from the water that doesn't go into the soil, because if you have 20 acres going through one spot, you have, you know, a lot of velocity with that water and can cause a lot of erosion. So that's why, like, a lot of the low spots where we don't have terraces, we have these grass waterways, which basically just give the water a path out or a path to that lowest point that doesn't take soil with it, hopefully. So grass here will sort of catch some of the soil particles as that water goes by, and also sort of shields the underlying soil so that you don't get gullies through those low spots. But you also want to kind of keep the weeds down and keep the grass down, because if you have a really thick stand of grass, that water will come down to the edge of the waterway and then cut down along the waterway rather than go onto it. So that's why we're mowing stuff down. We also want to avoid having any trees growing out here, which most open grassland, if it's not mowed at least every couple of years, you'll have mulberry trees and willow trees and all kinds of junk brush pop up. So that's kind of why we need to mow at least a little bit. A lot of the road ditch mowing is more decorative, I guess, but it is what it is. Gotta keep up with the neighbors, I guess. So doing a little bit of that too to keep things looking tidy, or at least tidy-ish. Probably a lot of diesel fuel gets used for that doesn't really need to be used, but it is what it is. You could say the same thing about lawns of everybody in town. Spots like this, where we don't have a real good stand of grass, probably part of the reason we have so many ragweeds right here is I think this maybe was one of the spots that we had kind of reworked last year, so the soil was disturbed, and probably the rye didn't get well enough established to get ahead of the ragweed seeds that got tilled up or got started here this spring. So I also want to get everything mowed off so that we can hopefully come back and drill a little bit kind of early fall. Might even take a look at the forecast in the short term and kind of think about exactly when we want to do it, but I kind of want to try to get some of these thin spots spotted in with the drill before we get busy with harvest, so that hopefully that stuff can get established this fall, take advantage of some of that cooler weather and the rains when we have less evaporation and less bone dry soil, hopefully, to get more established before going dormant over the winter and hopefully get a better permanent stand of grass in a few of these areas. It's looking kind of dark to the southwest. Radar looks like we're probably going to get a shower here. I'm not sure how much it's going to amount to. It's coming kind of from the southwest, it looked like, and it's pretty light straight south, but over that away there's kind of a little dark spot. I'm going to try to keep mowing until I can't, because this is sort of my last window for a couple weeks where I'm going to be available to do this sort of thing. And if it rains today, that means tomorrow's probably going to be shot too. It depends how much, I guess, but it's not real dry currently. I mean, it hasn't been wet enough anywhere that it's caused me a problem, but we have had a moderate amount of showers here in the last couple weeks. So it's definitely not bone dry like it is sometimes the end of July. But hopefully I can get a couple more spots hit before I get rained out at least. Most of the other stuff could probably wait, but I would like to get a couple waterways trimmed up a little bit, and some spots where I know there's a few trees coming that I don't want, that I'd like to get chopped off sooner than later so the grass can grow back, hopefully, and the trees don't. That's the idea, at least. Well, it's not a half an hour later, and it's raining pretty good. I was able to do a little bit of the waterway at another farm kind of adjacent to this or across the road. Got that finished up, and I'm on a dirt road and it's raining, so I figured I might as well just mow back along the crop on this side. Probably just going to get back to the gravel and go home at this point, because it looks like there might be a fair amount coming yet. It doesn't look very heavy, but you can't see more than maybe half a mile, something like that. So there's quite a bit of rain there. But at least we got something done, I guess, today. It's a little bit later and still raining. I think it stopped for a while, and then maybe started again here a little bit ago. It's not raining a lot, but things are wet and getting wetter. The sidewalk or the concrete is not totally saturated, but the roof on the shed there, you can see kind of some spots where the tree is blocking the rain a little bit. And it looked like about 6 cents in the gauge so far, so that's probably gonna put the kibosh on doing much more mowing today. I was hoping to also kind of spray some field edges, get like some morning glories killed and grass on the edges of the corn and stuff. And that's probably not going to work very well if it's raining either, so I guess I'm going to work on the combine for a little bit. I got all the stuff to get that gearbox put back up in the grain tank for the tank loading auger, and then got busy with this year's farming activities earlier in the spring. This is my pulley, which is aftermarket, and the key fits in this end of the keyway on the hub, but it's too tight on the other end. I'm not sure why. You would think that that should be broached out, and that it should be wider. Maybe it's just paint. There is some paint down in there. So anyway, I've got a little bit of cleanup to do on this to make sure that that'll slide, because it's tapered and this is the back side, so it's going to have to slide in through there to get the thing seated. So I'm going to figure out what needs to happen there. Either a little bit of cleanup with some solvent to get that paint off will probably be the first step, and if that doesn't do it, then hopefully just a little bit of light filing can get that squared away where the key will slide in there smoothly. And then probably going to try to drag the gearbox up the ladder and get her bolted back in. Well, it's been at least 3 and maybe 4 months since I've been up here, and it hasn't gotten cleaner. I think there was quite a bit of dust around that gearbox when we pulled that panel off. Anyway, here's where the gearbox is going to go. And it's sitting just over top over here. Not sure if I'm going to be able to get it drug over the bin extension, or if I'm going to need Dad's help to get it in here. But basically going to get it in there, and then there's some bolts that go up in those holes. But, attach that top end, and then this plate bolts with the 2 big holes onto the gearbox, and then there's some small bolts that actually hold the plate into this boot assembly. Fun times. 3 bolts started. You know, leave it a little bit loose so we can get the other plate on. Okay, loosen that back up just a little. Okay. So the gearbox should be basically where it belongs, but loose enough we can move it as we get this other plate on. Gearbox is in, so we're going to leave that with the keyway up. This is the driven side, so this is the clean grain elevator. Drives off this big pulley here on the top side. So there's a paddle chain back behind here. So the crane would come up this side, I believe, and then the empty paddles would go back down the front. The auger that fills the grain tank drives off of this 4-pronged dog, I guess we'll call it. So that's the output side of the gearbox. And the next step is going to be to get the pulley on there. So basically, we've got that half-mid key sitting in the slot, and we want it to be sort of tipped down a little bit. So that way, as we get the pulley up there, it won't push it out of the groove, hopefully. And then as we go back, the pulley will seat against that and tip it forward into its correct resting place. This is going to be embarrassing if I try to do it one-handed, but we're going to try to do it one-handed. Or 1.5-handed at least. Let me tip it clear up. There we go. Okay. Then we should just have that nut. I'm going to go look at a parts book and make sure there's not supposed to be a washer there, because it seems like maybe there should be a washer there. But, progress. There also is absolutely no air moving up here whatsoever. It's not really that hot, but we are right underneath one of these fluorescent lights. And up relatively high in the shed, so even though it's pretty cool down on the floor, it's a little bit warm up here, as you can see. Done a little bit of sweating, and I don't feel like I've exerted myself that much working on this stuff. It was a little bit of a pain wrestling that gearbox into position, and I have a few new scratches on my forearms, but not really that terrible once I got the block in the right spot to kind of hold it so I could get a bolt started. That seemed to be the key. And then I did have to add help. There's a couple bolts that come up through the bottom side of the grain tank there that are hex on both sides, and my arms aren't quite long enough to reach clear around all of this stuff. That would require 12-foot long arms, maybe with an extra elbow or two. So had him hold the bolts so that I could get that tightened up, but it seems like everything went back pretty close to the same spot it came from based on where the marks are from the bolt heads. And I don't think it's super critical alignment with how that auger drives anyway, so I'm hoping that we'll be in good shape on stuff. I need to get that thing tightened up and then get the belt on here and see how it's going to line up with the pulleys. A few years ago, when I had sort of cobbled together the old shaft, I think I adjusted some of the alignments, put some extra washers behind some of these idlers to get the belt running more in the center of them. And I'm not sure, the pulley should be in the same plane as it was before with the old style shaft, but I don't know for sure exactly how that's going to be. The old pulley was on a straight shaft, so you could kind of adjust where it was a little bit, and this one is going to be, it's going to be where it's going to be because it's a tapered shaft and everything. So there might be a little bit of adjustment on those pulleys once we get everything back together here as well, but kind of think there should be a washer behind that. Not positive, but I think maybe there should be. Well, I looked up the parts book online, and as far as I can tell, if you use a nut, you don't need a washer. So there's not really a lot of contact there, but I can't see that they want you to use a washer. I don't know about that. We'll tighten it up and see how it looks. There just is not, the flange on the nut is not very much bigger than the hole in the pulley. And I don't think it needs to hold a lot, but it sure don't look like there's much meat there. Not sure if I would like that. I'm gonna try to tighten this up, and we'll see how it looks. And you almost, so this is a lock nut, and it's a pinched type. So you can see how there's a little mark right there on 3 of the points. And that's basically distended after it's manufactured to distort the threads there so that you get a locking mechanism essentially, because it doesn't thread on easily when you get to that spot. So if I put a washer in there, then that locking mechanism is not going to lock into anything. So I almost can't put a washer in there, or my nut's not going to lock. It still seems weird that there's not more meat that overlaps, although maybe it's more than it looked like there was going to be now that it's on there tight. It could be that the pulley was sitting a little bit crooked since it wasn't in there tight, because it's overlapping most of the way into that keyway. I'm sure it's fine. Well, I'm going to see if I can get this belt hooked back up. This belt's about 1 mile long. It has to go around this, go around that, and then back over this idler. So basically it gives you as much belt contact onto that drive pulley as possible. Probably, I mean, originally this would not have had the grain tank extensions. This would be aftermarket. With the extensions, potentially you can be pushing quite a bit of grain above the auger to get more into the tank. So making sure that that doesn't slip is probably fairly important, because that's doing a little bit more work than it necessarily would have been designed to, possibly from the factory. Although I think all of this stuff is the same. Well, I take that back, because the 9600s I think had a wider clean grain auger, but I think the gearbox is the same. So if it works on a 9600, it should be fine on this, because the 9600 would be wider and probably have a longer auger to get to the center, I assume. I don't know, I've never been in a grain tank on a 9600, but I know that there's everything in the threshing part of the combine is wider on the 96 series. So I'm going to go put the tension back on the belt. I got things wound up here, and everything actually went pretty smoothly. I'm not sure if I'm on the pulleys on the bottom side. I need to check that out. But the tensioner on this has kind of a deal where you can lock it out or lock it at the no tension position. So I think that's probably what's going on. And as soon as I put a pry bar in there and pry up and then pull the clip, then I can get the spring tension onto the belt, hopefully without much issue. I am going to run it and see where the belts line up in the pulleys. So probably the next thing I'm going to do is kind of finish up. There's some stuff I need to tighten up from when I did the stainless steel pans in the bottom there. You can kind of see that they lap underneath this flange, and those bolts haven't been tightened back up, and there's a couple, I think 2 bolts on this end where it laps under some stuff, or maybe there's new bolts, but those never got tightened back up, and they're a real treat to get to. So I think probably we'll do that and get the cross augers in here kind of next, and then probably this stuff will actually end up going together last, just because it's kind of nice not having the auger tube in here and everything to work around. And this will give me better access to the bolts to put the covers back over top of the tank unloading augers and some of that stuff. So, but I do want to check the alignment before I put the covers and stuff back on anyway, so probably kind of continue doing what I can for the time being, and then pull it out of the shop and run it and see where the belts are landing in those pulleys, if I need to add or subtract washers behind to get things lined up well. Ideally, obviously the pulley is quite a bit wider than the belt, so there's some leeway in exactly where it's positioned, but you really want the belt running in the middle of the pulley, not against the edge. It feels like probably it was running against this edge at some point because it feels smooth rather than like paint. But when you're running against the edge, you're wearing against the shoulder on the belt, which is not great, both for the belt's integrity as well as maintaining as much surface area as possible where it laps into all the other pulleys on the drive direction. And then we also have had some, not in this area, but on the outside of the combine, where if the belt rubs against the side of the pulley long enough, it'll eventually wear that metal thin. And we had one that basically, like, a ring broke off of the pulley because it had worn thin on that rounded spot. And we had to tack weld it back together because it was after the parts store closed, or they didn't have one, or Saturday or something like that. We got it running again, but kind of try to pay attention to the belt alignment to avoid that happening. Went ahead and got tension on the belt, so we're spring loaded on everything now. And when I crawled back up, I went ahead and grabbed a carpenter square. So one way that you can kind of see how belts are going to come out is by running down the side of the pulley and then seeing, with a straight edge, where you come out in relation to other stuff. And I'm a little bit shorter than would be ideal here, but I can kind of adjust the belt to be where it should be. So it's maybe 1/8 of an inch inside, or 1/8 of an inch from the outside of the pulley to the edge of the belt. So like I pushed it over and I maybe messed with the top edge here, that it's not exactly where I put it, but it seems like I'm hitting okay. Looks like I put a couple washers behind this pulley, and I think I may end up taking some of those out, at least one. But I kind of want to run it and see exactly where it lands, like after the thing actually is turning around, and kind of self-aligns where it would be with the pulleys in their current alignment, because when you put it on static, you never know exactly how it's going to come out or how it's going to act once it's actually turning and following the path around. So that's why we're going to wait and put the shield on after we've kind of checked that out and made any adjustments that we need to. We're over on the right side of the combine now, and these are the bolts we have to tighten back up. There's also a clamp back there that hopefully you can kind of see in the video that's holding some heater hoses, so we had to take that loose and let it hang down so that we didn't drill into anything when we were putting those rivets in. If you can see the silver spots up on that. Anyway, there's 4 bolts here. We got to get that clip up there, and then there's 4 bolts on the back side. This side isn't too bad to get to. I'm probably going to get a little bit dirty, but not hate my life. Those ones on the other side are behind the vertical unloading auger gear case, the big auger that goes up and then out. And from what I remember, they were a real treat to get to. So we're going to do the easy ones first. The right side is all tight, so I'm over here on the left side now, and through the magic of any cameras that are smaller than my head, well, it's going to be dark. Ooh, you can't see the end of the bolt there. So this is the front trough right here, and not too bad to get to. I got both of these tightened without much issue. However, the other trough is stupid no light over here, and as you can see, we've got a whole bunch of random mechanisms in the way. So the unloading auger, this is the bottom end of the vertical section, and then we've got the sort of jack shaft that drives that. And this whole big arm thing here is part of the mechanism that tightens up the belts that drive that all. And what I need to get to is on the back side of that, up above, probably 6 or 8 inches above the lowest thing you can see. I mean, the lowest gap here. So I'm gonna have to probably get dirty and cuss a little bit, and hopefully I can get those back ones tight, and then probably I'm gonna quit there for tonight, because the next step is gonna be actually getting those augers set up, get the bearings on them and stuff, and get them put in, and I'm probably not going to start that tonight because it's going to be a little bigger project. But 2 bolts to go, and we'll have those stainless liners all finished up in the bottom of the grain tank.